Have Senator Roy Blunt on the line. How you doing, friend?
Hey, buddy, I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I'm marveling at this new twist because I know the Democrats really don't have anywhere else to go here. But with 76% of those watching Trump's speech and responding to a CBS poll saying they approved of President Trump's speech, I don't blame the Democrats for trying to go for this one.
Well, just imagine how painful that must be if you're on the other side of this effort to move the country in a new direction. If you see that over 70% of the people think the president is headed in the right direction, and I do too. And I thought it was a great speech and a speech that was thoughtfully setting the goals that our country should have to protect law enforcement. We just had an officer last night in Joplin, Missouri, that was shot serving papers on someone. We see this all the time happen in our country. We understand the healthcare system's not working. We know the infrastructure needs to be improved. And frankly, the out-of-control bureaucrats need to get under control. And, if you're on the other side of that, it has to be very discouraging to hear that the country widely responded in a positive way to what the president had to say. So we're going to continue to have people trying to change the subject, and occasionally that person is even the president himself manages to change the subject that diverts from the really positive things that are happening with needless bureaucratic rules and executive orders that don't make sense. President Obama issued all kinds of orders in the last 6 months of the year and several in December, all of which we managed to live without for 7.5 years of the Obama administration and about 225 years of the existence of the country. I think we ought to, on every one of those that we can get our hands on as a Congress, say, no, we're not going to do that. And if it's important that this area be looked at, let's look at it in a way that's not a last minute, out the door, I'm trying to put all the regulations I can on the books.
Yeah.
And then on this other issue, the Russian involvement in our elections, I think there's no doubt the Russians were involved in our elections, just like there's no doubt they were involved in the Ukraine elections and the Netherlands elections and the Moldovan elections, and now they're involved in the German and French elections. We've got a committee that's looking at that. I'm on the committee, the Intel committee, and the reason that's the best committee to look at it is that we have the daily relationships with all the people you'd have to talk to and the clearances to see all the documents you'd have to see. And, the truth is, my view of that is everybody is well served if that committee at the end of the process has talked to everybody any reasonable person thinks you should talk to and looked at every document any reasonable person thinks you should look at and see if there's anything there. The one thing that for sure is there is a Russian pattern of trying to involve themselves in things that weaken other countries' economies and other countries' relationships. And I just talked to people in France and Germany in the last week who have elections coming up, and they're seeing pretty aggressive Russian activity to either try to weaken the person who would win or do other things.
We are frustrated, many of us, with the lack of confirmations of the president's administration and undersecretaries. I realize some names have not been submitted, but we had upwards of still apparently remaining 500-plus appointments that have yet to be confirmed, and then Mitch McConnell decides to call a vacation, and then people are wondering, well, why don't you just make the Democrats stand up there as they can do for the 30 hours they can delay an appointment or a vote, and make them do that, and let's get this administration together. How come we can't make this happen sooner?
Well, the reason that it doesn't happen quicker is for all these nominations, there is a rule that you have to have 30 hours of debate, and the reason for that rule is these are important jobs, and you ought to be sure that people had at least a full day to look at them and debate them, and that's not a bad thing. Normally, it's something you can easily waive, and we've been staying in session 24 hours a day and had people in the presiding at 2 in the morning and 4 in the morning and 5 in the morning. Nobody was necessarily on the floor, but to use that 30 hours up, and I'm very frustrated about it as well, because it's just it's been since we put the government together the first time under George Washington, which did take a while. It's never taken this long to get a cabinet confirmed before, and clearly the Democrats are doing everything they can to slow down the ability of the president to take control of the government. There is a real lack of having the nominees for the 1,000 or so other jobs. It's not 500. There are probably 1,000 other jobs that take some kind of confirmation. And once we get the principal secretaries in place, I think, frankly, it's time to look at that, getting the help they need, and see if there's not some way to work with the president and do that. But for that to really work, you really do have to have nominees for a bunch of these jobs, and there aren't that many there yet, because the president's been having to work so hard to run the government with a limited number of people to run the government with.
Now, we also have some frustration among folks who are surprised that the Republican Party is kind of still without an Obamacare replacement plan that is on paper. Where are we sitting with that?
Well, we had meetings last night with the House, the two House chairmen, the Ways and Means chairman and the Commerce Committee chairman that has health care responsibility over there, to talk about our plan, their plan, how we have a plan that everybody will vote for. Really, the challenge here is that there's, at least on the Senate side and maybe on the House side, just not room for much margin of error. You know, if you have to have 51 votes and there are 52 of you, it doesn't mean that 49 people aren't in agreement. It may mean that 51 people aren't yet in agreement, and we need to get this done. Doesn't get better over time. Families aren't having the kind of access they need or the kind of insurance they can afford, and that's not getting better, it's getting worse. So I'm hopeful that we are able to move on with the repeal of Obamacare and begin to have it clear what's going to be there in the future, and things like staying on your parents' health insurance longer will be a permanent part of our system, as will some way to ensure that people with pre-existing conditions still have the ability to get insurance.
Yeah, so those two things will stay. Well, Senator, it's the first time I've talked to you since the inauguration, by the way, and thank you for the hookup, and thank you very much for your involvement in that. I thought your speech was awesome, and it was a proud moment for Missouri to have you leading the way in the inauguration. That was really something else.
Well, thank you, buddy, and it was good to have you here. I was glad to get to do it. You know, that may be, if it's really been 6 weeks, that may be the longest time in 6 years we haven't had a chance to,
I know, yeah, right.
to talk. And part of it is we really are in a hard-fought fight here to help this president get his team in place and to get his policies moving forward. And I'm going to continue to do everything I can to see that both of those things happen.
Well, fantastic, and we're so glad you are back in the Senate, and thank you very much for being with us. We'll follow you on Twitter @Roy Blunt, and keep in touch, my friend.
You bet. See you soon.
All right, it's Common Sense Radio.